This story is titled, They Spent $570,000 on a Wedding but Refused to Save My Daughter's Life. Now, they expect me to save them. Hey everyone! Before we jump into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed the channel is losing some traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can support us. It's quick, free, and it helps us keep bringing you awesome content. Your support means the world. Let's keep this channel growing together. Thanks so much. Now let's start the video. So I've been sitting on this story for a while, and I guess it's time to finally get this shit off my chest. This might be long as hell, but I need to type it all out. Maybe it'll help me process everything that happened. I'm Dan, 32 male, and I run this small interior design company in Austin. Nothing crazy fancy, just a decent business that pays the bills and lets me take care of my wife, I'll call her M, and our 8-year-old daughter Lil. We got a nice enough apartment, food on the table, not stressing about money every single day. Pretty normal life, you know? My parents, though, whole different vibe. Mike and Sue own this furniture store in town that they market as luxury or whatever. They're not actually rich, but holy shit do they act like they are. They got this big house in the nice part of town, drive these expensive cars they can barely afford, and throw these weekend parties for their friends. Really just business connections they're trying to impress. The kind of people who care more about how things look than how things actually are. Growing up as the oldest kid in that house was straight up garbage, no other way to put it. My younger brother Rob was always their favorite, and they didn't even try to hide it. I'm not exaggerating. This shit was so obvious. Like, I'd bring home a report card full of A's, and they'd barely look up from whatever they were doing. That's what we expect from you, Dan. But Rob would get like one B plus among a bunch of C's, and suddenly they're throwing a freaking party with cake and telling all their friends what a genius he is. Same thing when college came around. When I left for school, my dad gave me this weird formal handshake, and my mom was like, "Call us when you get there." That was it. But 2 years later, when Rob went to the local community college, literally still living at home, they threw this massive going away party like he was leaving for some Ivy League school on the other side of the country. Had like 50 people over, catered food, the whole thing. For community college, while living at home. I figured out real quick that I couldn't count on them for anything important. So I just put my head down, worked my ass off, and built everything myself. Started from zero, no connections, no startup money, nothing. And honestly, I never expected much from my parents after all that. But what they did when my kid actually needed them, man, that was a whole new level of messed up that I never saw coming. After graduating college, I started working at this small design firm in Austin. Just a basic design assistant job, nothing glamorous. But I seriously loved it. There's something about creating spaces that actually mean something to people that just felt right, you know? It was satisfying in a way school never was. After a couple of years learning how everything worked, I saved up enough to start my own tiny company. And I mean tiny. Just me working out of our apartment at first. Then a small office with one part-time employee. That's when I met M. I was setting up this small furniture showroom I'd rented downtown. She was supposed to be in and out, but we ended up talking for like an hour about books and music and all kinds of stuff. Just clicked immediately. About a year later, we got married. Nothing huge, just a simple ceremony with close friends. My parents came but acted like it was some kind of chore they had to get through. Then Lil came along, this amazing little girl with these bright eyes exactly like her mom's. Life was pretty good back then. Not Instagram perfect good, but good enough. I had my company slowly growing, M was teaching preschool, and we were making enough to be comfortable. The one thing we messed up on was health insurance. As a small business owner, I didn't have employer coverage, and private plans were expensive as fuck. We were all healthy, so we thought we'd just wait a bit longer until the business was more stable. And that was the worst mistake of my life. Like, I've made plenty of dumb choices, but nothing compares to that one. Anyway, Lil was this super active kid, always running around, laughing, doing kid stuff. Total ball of energy. But when she was around 3, she started getting this weird cough that just wouldn't go away. At first, me and Em figured it was just some normal kid cold. I mean, if you've got kids, you know they're basically germ magnets at that age. They catch everything. But then we noticed the cough wasn't going away. Like, at all. It had been a few weeks, and instead of getting better, she was actually getting worse. Started getting tired all the time, which was totally not like her. She stopped eating as much. Had this low fever that just kinda stayed. Not high enough to freak out about, but definitely not normal. And sometimes she'd be playing with her toys or something and just stop suddenly to catch her breath. Em noticed it more than me because she was with Lil during the day while I was working. She kept telling me something wasn't right, and I was like, yeah, let's give it another couple days. Kids get sick all the time. Stupid. I should have listened to her right away. Then one afternoon, I'll never forget this day as long as I live. Em was playing with Lil in the living room when Lil just collapsed. Just straight up dropped to the floor. She looked up at Em and said, Mommy, I'm so tired. In this weak little voice I'd never heard from her before. Em completely lost it and called me right away. I was in the middle of a client meeting, but I didn't even say goodbye. Just ran out to my car and drove home way too fast. Got there to find my little girl breathing super fast, her eyes all unfocused. I didn't even think, just grabbed her and drove straight to the ER. Em jumped in the car with us, and I remember her in the back seat with Lil, talking to her the whole time, trying to keep her awake. The ER docs took her back immediately, which was both good and terrifying. Like, it's good they didn't make us wait, but also, shit, that means it's serious. We sat in that waiting room for what felt like forever while they ran tests. When the doctor finally came back with the CT scan results, he had that serious look that makes your stomach drop. Dan, we found a congenital abnormality in Lil's lung. It's compressing her airway, and she needs surgery immediately before her condition worsens. I swear the room started spinning. A lung problem? In my 3-year-old? I kept thinking this had to be a mistake. This kind of shit happens to other people, not to us. Not to my perfect little girl. But it got worse. After the doctor explained everything, a lady from the hospital's billing office pulled us aside. She handed me a piece of paper with a number on it that made me feel like I'd been hit by a truck. $120,000. We can proceed with the surgery immediately, but the hospital needs assurance that you can cover the costs. Do you have insurance? She asked. And that's when it really hit me. We didn't have insurance. We'd been putting it off because private plans were expensive as fuck and we were all healthy. We'd been planning to get it soon for like a year at that point. I realized in that moment how badly I'd screwed up by waiting. Now my daughter was literally paying the price for my mistake. I held Em's hand so tight, trying not to completely lose my shit in front of her and the billing lady. We'll find the money. Just save my daughter, I told them. But inside I was panicking. Where the hell do you get $120,000 that fast? We had maybe $25,000 in savings. I could sell my car for another $15,000, but that still left us $80,000 short. That's when I thought about my parents. They weren't super rich or anything, but they had money. They owned a successful business, had a big house, nice cars. I didn't expect them to write a check for the whole amount, but at least enough to make up what we needed. I mean, this was their granddaughter. What kind of grandparents would just stand by when their grandkid might die? Even if they'd always treated me like crap, surely they wouldn't let their grandchild suffer. So after making sure Lil was stable and Em was okay at the hospital, I drove to my parents' house. The whole drive over, I felt like I was gonna puke. I've never been good at asking for help, especially from them. But this wasn't about me. This was about Lil. When I pulled up to their house, I was confused because there were a ton of cars parked outside. I walked up to the door and could hear music playing. What the hell? I rang the doorbell like 5 times before someone finally answered. It was my mom, all dressed up with makeup and jewelry, holding a glass of wine. Behind her, I could see their house was packed with people in fancy clothes, waiters walking around with trays of food, music playing. They were throwing some big-ass party. Dan, what are you doing here? She asked, looking annoyed that I'd shown up unannounced. Mom, I need to talk to you and Dad. It's urgent. It's about Lil. She frowned and gestured for me to wait in the entryway. We're in the middle of something here. Can it wait? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. No, it can't wait. It's an emergency. She sighed dramatically and went to find my dad. I stood there in their giant foyer, watching people laughing and drinking, feeling completely out of place in my wrinkled work clothes. Eventually, I found out it was a celebration for Rob's upcoming wedding to his fiancée Jen. Well, apart from the fact that they didn't even tell me about Rob getting married. They were freaking partying while my daughter was in the hospital fighting for her life. My dad finally came over, looking irritated. Dan, what is it? I tried to stay calm.
We're in the middle of Rob's
really
engagement
did.
party.
Dad, listen. Lil is in the hospital. She has a tumor in her lung. The doctors say she needs immediate surgery. If she doesn't get it, she might not make it. I waited for them to freak out, to ask questions. But nothing. Not a single question about their granddaughter's condition. Not even a hint of worry on their faces. My mom just stood there, glancing back at the party like she was missing out. I swallowed hard and continued. The hospital needs $120,000 before they can do the surgery. I've tried everything, but I can only come up with about $40,000. Can you help me? I don't need all of it, just enough so they can operate right away. My mom put down her wine glass and said, Dan, we've already planned Rob's wedding. We can't cancel or postpone it now. I felt like I'd been slapped. What does Rob's wedding have to do with Lil's surgery? That's when my dad crossed his arms and said the words I'll never forget. We've already spent $570,000 on his wedding. If we give you that money now, the wedding won't happen. I just stood there, trying to process what I'd just heard. They'd dropped $570,000 on Rob's fucking wedding, but wouldn't spare anything to save their own granddaughter's life. I couldn't wrap my head around it. Who spends that much on a wedding? And who the fuck chooses a party, even an expensive one, over a child's life? In that moment, standing in their fancy house with their fancy friends all around, I realized that these people weren't my family. Not really. They were just strangers who happened to share my DNA. At this point, I couldn't believe what was happening. My parents basically just told me that my brother's fancy wedding was more important than my daughter's life. I looked over at Rob, who was standing across the room in this expensive suit, holding a champagne glass and laughing with some friends. This was the same brother who I'd always looked out for growing up. When we were kids and he'd mess up, I'd take the blame half the time. When he was struggling with math in high school, I stayed up late helping him study. When he needed money during his first year of college, I loaned him $500 that he never paid back. I wasn't perfect or anything, but I always tried to be there for him. So I walked over to him, past all the guests who were giving me these weird looks. I probably looked like total shit. Hadn't slept, hadn't changed my clothes, eyes all red from crying. Rob, can we talk for a minute? I asked. He looked annoyed but followed me to a quieter corner. I explained everything about Lil, the tumor, the surgery, the money. I thought maybe he'd understand. Maybe he'd say, dude, we can postpone the wedding. My niece's life is more important. But he just stood there with this blank look on his face. And then he said, that sucks, man. But what do you want me to do about it? I couldn't believe it. Rob, you guys are spending $570,000 on your wedding. That's insane. All I need is like $80,000 to save Lil's life. Can't you just scale back a little? Have a normal wedding like normal people? He laughed. Actually fucking laughed. Do you know how long we've been planning this? Jen's family is expecting a certain kind of event. We've got people flying in from all over. Deposits have been paid. It's not that simple. I was desperate at this point. These were the last people I wanted to ask for help. But Lil was running out of time. So right there, in the middle of their fancy party with all their rich friends watching, I swallowed every bit of pride I had and got down on my knees only for my daughter. Yeah, you read that right. I literally got on my knees in front of my little brother. Rob, please, I'm begging you. Just help with part of it. I'll pay you back every cent, I swear. But Lil, she's going to die without this surgery. I looked up at him, hoping to see, I don't know, some kind of human emotion, some tiny bit of the brother I grew up with. But instead, he took a step back like I was covered in mud or something. He looked around, saw people watching, and his face got all red. Jesus, Dan, get up! You're embarrassing yourself, he hissed. Then louder so the people nearby could hear, look, I'm responsible for Jen and the family we're building. I can't just throw away all our wedding plans. I'm sorry about Lil, but I can't help. Around me, I could hear people whispering, and some of them were actually laughing, like my daughter's life wasn't hanging in the balance. My dad appeared next to me and put his hand on my shoulder. His voice was cold as ice when he said, get up, Dan. Stop embarrassing the family in front of our guests. Not, I'm sorry we can't help more. Not, let's figure something out together. Just, stop embarrassing us. I slowly got to my feet, feeling like I was in some kind of nightmare. I looked at each of them, my mom still glancing back at her party, my dad with his jaw clenched in anger, Rob already turning away to rejoin his friends. Thank you, Mom. Thank you, Dad. Thank you, Rob, I said, my voice cracking. Today I finally understand who my real family is and who are just strangers. Then I walked out. Didn't even look back. It was pouring rain when I left their house, like straight up movie-level downpour. I just stood there on their stupid fancy doorstep, getting soaked, feeling like someone was sitting on my chest. I had gotten on my fucking knees and begged, and all I got back was their cold, shitty attitude. I somehow made it to my car, slammed the door, and just lost it. I cried like I hadn't since I was a little kid. I'm not ashamed to admit it. My head pressed against the steering wheel. All the fear for Lil, all the stress, all the pain of being rejected by my own family. It all just came pouring out. But then I remembered, Lil, my little girl was in that hospital fighting for every breath. Em was sitting there alone, waiting for me to come back with good news. I couldn't fall apart in my car outside my parents' house like some teenager after a breakup. I had to figure something out. I started the car swallowing the anger and frustration and drove back to the hospital. The whole way there, my mind was racing. Who else could I ask? What else could I sell? Could we get a loan? Would the hospital let us pay in installments? When I got back to the hospital, I was surprised to see M's parents had arrived. They'd driven in from San Antonio as soon as M called them. They weren't rich or anything, just normal working class people. My father-in-law was a plumber, and my mother-in-law worked part-time at a grocery store. My mother-in-law rushed up to me as soon as she saw me and grabbed my hands. Her eyes were red from crying. Dan, did you talk to your parents? Will they help? I couldn't even answer. My throat closed up, and I just stood there, dripping on the hospital floor. But she only had to look at my face to understand. She pulled me into a hug, not caring that I was soaking wet. My father-in-law came over and put his hand on my shoulder. It's okay, son. We'll figure it out ourselves. We all sat down in the waiting room, and together with M, we started making a plan. The following day was a blur of activity. I started selling everything I owned. My car, gone for $15,000. Every cent of our savings, $25,000 completely wiped out. I borrowed from friends, coworkers, anyone who might have a few bucks to spare. The response from people actually shocked me. This young employee who'd only been with my company for 6 months pressed $500 into my hand and said, "Boss, I don't have much, but this is all I can give." An old coworker I hadn't talked to in years somehow heard what was happening and called out of nowhere. He sent me $3,000 with a note saying, "I remember when you covered for me during that project disaster. I owe you one. It's time I paid it back." People I barely knew were stepping up more than my own family. I was getting Venmo transfers from distant acquaintances, Facebook messages from old classmates asking how they could help. It was overwhelming, but we were still coming up short. I kept selling stuff. My computer, my watch, even our furniture. Our apartment got emptier by the day as I sold everything that wasn't absolutely essential. M was amazing through all of this. Not once did she complain about me selling our stuff, not even when I sold the dining table her grandmother had given us. But after all that, after every favor called in, every possession sold, we were still $40,000 short of the $120,000 we needed. I was sitting in the hospital cafeteria, staring at the numbers on a napkin, feeling completely hopeless. What else could we possibly do? That's when my father-in-law's phone rang. It was their bank. He walked away to take the call, and when he came back, he had this weird look on his face. He sat down next to my mother-in-law and whispered something to her. She nodded, wiping away a tear. Then they both came over to where Em and I were sitting. "Dan, how much more do you need?" my father-in-law asked, his voice steady. I didn't want to say it, but I had no choice. $40,000. There was silence for a moment, then my mother-in-law nodded and said, "All right, come pick up the money tomorrow morning." I was completely confused. "But where are you getting that kind of money? You don't have $40,000. My father-in-law let out a soft laugh, but there was no humor in it. "We sold our house. The bank just called to confirm everything. As long as Lil gets better, it's worth it." I couldn't move. I literally couldn't process what I was hearing. My parents, who lived in a huge house and had just dropped $570,000 on a wedding, had turned their backs on their own flesh and blood. But my in-laws, who lived in a modest 3-bedroom house they'd worked their entire lives to pay off, had just sold their home to save my daughter. Em burst into tears and hugged her parents. I just sat there, unable to even form words. What do you say to people who just sold their home to save your child? "Thank you" doesn't even begin to cover it, but that's all I could manage to choke out. "Thank you. I don't know how I'll ever repay you." My mother-in-law took my hand and squeezed it tight. "You don't need to repay us, Dan. Family helps family. That's just what we do." Such a simple statement, but it hit me like a truck because it was exactly what my own mother had failed to understand. With the money from my in-laws, we finally had enough for Lil's surgery. The hospital scheduled it for the next morning. Those hours waiting during the operation were the longest of my life. Em and I just sat there in the waiting room, barely talking, both too scared to say anything. When the surgeon finally came out, I thought I was going to pass out from holding my breath. But then he smiled and said, "The procedure went very well. She'll recover gradually." I collapsed into one of those uncomfortable hospital chairs and just cried from pure relief. Em was sobbing next to me, and my in-laws held her tight. My father-in-law stood there nodding like he knew it would work out all along. These people were my real family, not the ones who lived in the big house across town. Family is the people who stand by you when everything goes to shit. From that day on, I swore I'd never ask my parents for anything again. I already had my real family right there with me. 2 weeks after the surgery, Lil was released from the hospital. She got stronger every day. Kids got more resilience than I ever had. When I pushed her wheelchair out of the hospital, she looked up at me with this bright smile that I thought I might never see again and said, "Daddy, I want to run and play again." I couldn't stop the tears, but these were different from the ones I'd been crying for weeks. These were good tears. I hugged her tight, feeling her heart beating strong and steady against my chest. I looked at Em and saw nothing but love in her eyes. We'd been through absolute hell, but we were starting over. But I'm not gonna lie. Deep down, I was still burning with anger. I couldn't just forget kneeling in front of my parents and brother. I couldn't forget how they treated me like I was nothing. They'd looked down on me like I was pathetic. And now I had something to prove. After Lil recovered, I threw myself into work like a man possessed. I wasn't just working to make money. I was working to pay back everyone who believed in me and to prove I didn't need my parents' charity. I started getting up at 5 a.m. every day and working 16-hour days. I read everything I could about business management, investments, and growing a company. I wasn't just doing small residential interior design jobs anymore. I started bidding on hotels, shopping centers, office buildings. I never said no to an opportunity, no matter how impossible it seemed. Sleepless nights, endless client meetings, tough negotiations. I took it all on. That anger inside me was like rocket fuel. I was exhausted all the time but couldn't stop. Em was worried about me. "Dan, you need to slow down. You're going to burn out," she'd say. But I couldn't slow down. I had to make it work. I had to prove something. To my parents, to myself, to everyone. Then things started changing. About a year after Lil got out of the hospital, I landed a contract that changed everything. A $2 million interior design project for a major real estate company. It was way bigger than anything I'd done before. And honestly, I was scared shitless that I couldn't deliver. But I wasn't about to turn it down. I hired more people, rented a bigger office, and somehow we pulled it off. The client was thrilled with the work, and they referred me to other big companies. 3 years later, my business had grown 5 times bigger. What started as a tiny company with just me and one part-time employee became one of the top design firms in the area. We had a team of 28 people, a downtown office, and clients calling us instead of the other way around. My name started showing up in business magazines with headlines like, "From Zero to Millionaire, The Journey of Dan, the Man Who Rebuilt His Life After Adversity." I never reached out to tell my parents about any of it, but I knew they saw those articles. I knew they saw me on local TV talking at business conferences. But now I wasn't Dan the son who needed their help. I was Dan the self-made businessman who built everything from nothing. And that felt pretty damn good. About a year ago, I got featured in a major business magazine, and during the interview, the journalist asked what drove me to succeed. I could have given the usual answer about hard work, but I told her the truth, how my own family turned their backs on me when I begged for help to save my daughter. They spent everything on my brother's $570,000 wedding and left me on my knees, pleading. So, I built my success out of spite, proving I didn't need them. I named names, held nothing back. When the article dropped, it exploded. People were furious, calling out my parents and brother for their coldness. Social media was on fire, and strangers flooded my inbox with their own stories of family betrayal. Turns out, a lot of people know what it's like to be abandoned by the ones who should have had their back. But that was just the beginning of the shitstorm for them. I hadn't thought about the business implications of my interview. I was just telling the truth. But man, did it have consequences. After the story came out, business partners started cutting ties with my parents' furniture store. Longtime clients canceled orders. Their business connections disappeared overnight. The same people who used to party with them at their house suddenly wanted nothing to do with them. No one wants to work with monsters who let their granddaughter almost die so they could throw a fancy wedding. Funny how that works. My parents got pushed out of the business world pretty fast. Their store started losing money. They had to lay off employees. Their friends stopped inviting them to events. They used to be respected in that community, but now they had nothing. Alone and broke. And Rob? My golden child brother who thought he'd won the life lottery with his $570,000 wedding, pretty wife, and comfortable life? His perfect little world came crashing down too. When his wife Jen read my interview, she was horrified. Apparently, he'd never told her the full story of what happened with Lil. She called me, first time we'd spoken in years, and asked if it was all true. I didn't embellish or exaggerate, just told her exactly what happened that night at the party. She was quiet for a long time, then just said, "Thank you for being honest," and hung up. A few days later, I heard from a mutual friend that Jen had filed for divorce. She couldn't stay married to someone that heartless, Couldn't imagine raising kids with a man who'd let his niece suffer so he could have a big party. Can't say I blamed her. So Rob lost everything. His marriage, his fancy house, his social standing. Turned out a marriage built on being a selfish asshole wasn't exactly built to last. Who knew? In the end, the heartless ones ended up with nothing but each other. My parents and Rob, alone in that big house that used to host parties but now just echoed with silence. I didn't plan any of this. But I'm not gonna lie, there was a part of me that felt satisfied seeing karma finally catch up with them. They'd been pretending to be these amazing, successful people for so long while treating others like garbage. Now everyone knew who they really were. But the weird thing is, that satisfaction didn't last. I thought I'd feel great watching them lose everything. But instead, I just felt empty. Like, what was the point? Lil was healthy. My business was thriving. My real family, Lil, my in-laws, my friends who stood by me, they were all good. Maybe revenge isn't all it's cracked up to be. Or maybe there are better ways to get even. Once my business was stable and making serious money, I went back to every single person on that list. I called them to my office one by one over the course of a few weeks. Some of them worked for me now, others I hadn't seen in years. I handed each of them an envelope with cash, 10 times whatever amount they'd given us for Lil's surgery. For some, I offered to pay off their debts or invest in business ideas they had. I figured it was the least I could do. But the crazy thing? Most of them refused. "Boss, you don't need to do this," my office manager told me when I tried to give her back 10 times the $500 she'd given us when she was just starting as my assistant. "You've already paid me back by giving me this job and treating me with respect. We helped you because we believed in you, not because we expected anything back." I couldn't even find words to respond. All I could do was shake my head and grip her hand tight, feeling more grateful than I knew how to express. But there was one debt I couldn't let go of: my in-laws. They were living in a small rental apartment now, and even though they never complained, I knew they missed their home. After Lil was discharged, I spent a whole year working my ass off and saving every penny I could. I secretly tracked down the guy who bought their house, negotiated with him, and eventually bought it back. Paid 30% over market value, but I didn't care. The day I handed them the keys, my mother-in-law just froze, tears in her eyes. "Dan, how?" "We never expected," I told her. "You gave me everything when I had nothing. This is the least I can do." My father-in-law was quiet for a minute, then put his hand on my shoulder. "I never once doubted you, son." We all sat together that night for a real family dinner in their old house, back where it belonged. It was one of the best nights of my life. A few years after Lil's surgery, with Em pregnant with our second kid, I decided it was time for another change. I bought a bigger house in a nice neighborhood with a yard, not to show off, but because I wanted space for Em, Lil, and our soon-to-be new baby. But I also made sure it had an in-law suite, so my in-laws could move in with us if they wanted to. They gave me a home when I lost everything, and now I wanted them to have choices. They could keep their house that I bought back, or they could live with us, whatever made them happiest. But life has a way of throwing curveballs at you right when you think you've got everything figured out. And my parents? They weren't done with me yet. Not by a long shot. They had lost almost everything because of that article and the backlash that followed. I thought I'd never see them again. But a few months ago, my phone rang with an unknown number when I answered. "Dan, it's Mom." That voice. The same one that watched me beg and turned away. Now all shaky and desperate. Can you help us?" She explained they were about to lose their house. Needed $200,000 to keep it from the bank. $200,000? I almost laughed. I remembered needing just $120,000 to save my daughter's life, and they chose a $570,000 party instead. The audacity of these people. But you know what? I played along. Told them to meet me at this nice cafe. My treat. They showed up looking desperate but hopeful, probably thinking I'd swoop in like some prodigal son and save the day. I let them talk, let them ramble on about how hard things had been, how they never expected this to happen. I nodded, sipped my coffee, and pretended to listen. Then, when they finally got to the point, "Dan, can you help us?" I pulled out my wallet, set a couple of $100 bills on the table, and leaned back. "Drinks are on me," I said, standing up. "I'd do more, but, I'm spending a ridiculous amount on my new baby's shower. Gotta make sure it's perfect, and I can't cancel it to help you. We're going all out." Their faces dropped. My dad's jaw tightened. My mom's eyes went glassy. "You're joking, right?" my dad muttered. I smirked. "Oh, so now parties are a bad way to spend money?" I grabbed my coat and took one last look at them. Funny how that works. I walked out and drove straight home to where my real family was. When I walked through the door, Lil came running up to me, giggling as she wrapped her arms around my waist. Em was in the kitchen, laughing with her parents as they planned the baby shower, our celebration, one filled with love, not empty status. I walked over, kissed Em on the cheek, and sat down with them, feeling something I never felt around my parents. Peace. Turns out I didn't need revenge. I had already won. What do you guys think? If you were in my shoes, would you forgive such a thing? Let me know in the comments.